Hi, folks. Welcome to my third broadcast, my third week of broadcasting live. I'm glad to have you visiting with us today. This evening, it's evening here in the States. It's way in the middle of the night in some other parts of the world, so I don't know where you're joining us from. Welcome. I'm excited to be sharing my travel experiences with you. So while I'm waiting for people to show up, maybe if you would like to leave in the comments a little bit about, tell me that you're here, say hi, and let me know where you're calling in, what world you are. So today I'm going to talk about the Camino de Santiago. I walked the Camino del Norte route of the Camino in Spain in the fall of 2017, and so I'm going today to tell you a few things about. Let's see, let me get my PowerPoint up here. Here's what we're going to do, and we're going to talk about. I'm going to give you a day in the life of a pilgrim, what it was like to walk each day. Pretty much every day was very similar. So that you can get an idea of what that was like. And I'll tell you a few stories as we go along. I will talk about some of the reasons that people walk the Camino and different ways that they do walk. And then I'll give you some resources if you're thinking about doing a Camino, some resources that will be useful for you as you plan, and also my recommendations based on my experience of doing the Camino one time. So again, if you're just joining us, say hi in the comments and tell me where you're you're watching from, and let me know maybe a little bit about why you were interested in seeing this live broadcast. So currently I am in Tucson, Arizona for the winter. I was camping for a few months with my daughter and it got really cold in the tent, so we decided to get a place that had heat and beds for a while. So we are here in Tucson, and I think in a couple weeks we're going to move to Phoenix for maybe the month of February, and then it's going to start warming up in the south, so maybe we'll go back to camping again. So let me give you a little bit of history about the Camino. Whether you may know this or not, I'll just try to do this really quickly, just in case you already know. The Camino is really a web of many routes that people have traditionally taken in order to reach the Compostela de Santiago in Spain, which is about, I'm going to try to point it right here. It's about, let's see, I need to give you a transition over PowerPoint. There you go. This will be helpful. And it will, the Compostela in Spain. It's not all the way to the coast. And at the cathedral there, the Catholics believe that that is the resting place of the Apostle St. James. And so it is a sacred place for pilgrimages. Before the Camino became a medieval pilgrimage route, many of these routes were routes that the Celtic people took to the sea, out to the coast of Spain, which was considered it was at that time as far west as they could go. So it was the end of the world, the end of land. Finisterre is still a town there, meaning the end of land. And so some pilgrims still today walk the 4 days extra from Santiago all the way to the sea. Most end at Santiago, and everybody has a different reason for doing the pilgrimage. And as you can see, there's many routes. Even today, people go up from Portugal. I ran into people who came from, had walked all the way from Germany. Another young man had walked all the way from his home in Italy. So there's lots of reasons for doing the Camino and lots of ways to get to the Compostela. So a little bit about what the routine is as you walk the Camino. You usually get up in the morning. You generally stay overnight in an albergue. I'll talk more about that in a moment. An albergue is a place for pilgrims to sleep at night. and there are albergues all along the route of the Camino, especially for pilgrims, and there are also albergues that are available for anyone that wants to stay in them. But if you're in a pilgrim's albergue that's only for pilgrims, you will be asked to leave by a certain time in the morning. Usually that was 8 or 8:30. Sometimes they let you stay as late as 9, but that was rare because they have to get the albergue ready for the next day's group of people that are coming in to sleep. You might have breakfast at the albergue. There's always a kitchen. You can fix your own. Sometimes they provide your breakfast for you, or you may go to a local cafe and have breakfast before you start. Oftentimes, I would eat a little something when I got up at the albergue, and then I would start walking because I wanted to get as much walking in while the day was really calm and cool. Also, I got to see some beautiful sunrises as I left the albergues. And then usually after about 3 miles, I would find a place to stop, and I would have a breakfast of a tortilla, which in Spain, a tortilla is similar to what we in the United States call an omelet. So these were more like omelets to us, but they call them tortillas. And I'd usually have a café con leche. I'd spend some time resting a little bit before I went on. I rested about every 3 to 5 miles as I walked. So that I didn't get overtaxed during the day. I usually oftentimes stopped again. Oh, I think I'll mention that in a minute. But anyway, then, as you're walking the Camino, there are arrows telling you which direction to go. There's kind of a joke in that many times you will see 5 or 6, this is serious though, sometimes you will see 5 or 6 arrows all in one place pointing the same direction. And then there are times when you really need to see that arrow because you can't figure out from the map which direction you're supposed to go, and you can't find a yellow arrow anywhere. But most of the time, there are arrows pointing you in the direction, especially at junctions. And these arrows will take many, many forms, and some of them are very artistic. Some of them are just scratched on the sidewalk, but they will take many forms as you go along. I really love to see the homemade signs that people in the neighborhood left. They would maybe put up an arrow saying, no, you need to go this way. It's really great to see all kinds of arrows. Here's an arrow you can barely see. It's on a post and barely noticeable. And then there were times when you would get one like this I think that was longer than I am tall, to make it very clear which direction you need to go. So, there was sometimes you were encouraged. Let's see this. There's another one. Another arrow that's very graffiti-like. And then sometimes you were encouraged to take a little detour into a bar or cafe. As you can see, these arrows led you in and led you back out, which I thought was quite inventive of the person that owned the place. For me, I usually stopped again mid-morning and had another second breakfast. I like having several small meals, and then it gave me another chance to sit down and rest and enjoy just being on the Camino. I usually spent quite a bit of time at this rest stop writing in my journal, and I'll talk a little bit more about the ways that I use my journal in a little bit. And then you would continue on. This was one day here, this hike here was one day where I saw almost no one the whole day. I was really by myself, and it was lovely. Really gives you a lot of time to think. At lunch, sometimes if I was ready to eat again, maybe around 1 or 2, depended, days changed a little bit. The schedule changed day to day. I always had at least a picnic or some kind of a snack in my pack. And I think that's really important that you always carry at least some food, because there are days when you may go quite a ways and not find a cafe or any kind of a store to buy any food. So always have at least a few provisions in your pack. This was a particularly well-provisioned today, as you can see, with the sausages and yogurt and lots of fruit. It wasn't always that great of food that I had to eat on my lunches. And then around mid to late afternoon, most pilgrims are ready to stop by then, and they will find their albergue. This was one particularly beautiful albergueo in a small town called Serdio. It was a very small town, and I had after I went and checked into my albergue, I went and had dinner, and I had one of the best meals of the whole trip there in this little village. There was only one cafe, and just the albergue and a few people that live there. So, and once you go in, your credential is stamped. Everybody that is a pilgrim on the Camino gets a credential, and that is just an accordion fold of paper that has places for each albergue to stamp their stamp in it to show, and they date it so that it shows that you have been at that albergue on that date. And this is your proof that you have done a certain amount of time on the Camino. For me, my credential is a wonderful souvenir showing all of the stops that I've made along the way. Then at the albergue, you have the opportunity to take a shower, wash your clothes, relax, and get to know people. The beds in the albergues are generally dorm style and usually mixed dorms. So you have a really great opportunity to meet people who also are pilgrims on the albergue. Sometimes you will eat in the albergue. This was one beautiful albergue that I stayed in, probably my favorite of the whole trip, where they provided our dinner for us. That was pretty rare. And we ate together as a community. Everybody that was staying there ate together. But sometimes you will go out to a cafe, but like I said, there's also kitchens. Sometimes I would prepare my dinner there. Sometimes I was so exhausted, I would like just fix a really quick meal and go to bed. I would be so tired from walking. So it varies from day to day a little bit, but generally that is the schedule. You go to bed, early to bed, and then you start all over in the morning. Let's see, I was going to tell you a little story about that happened to me in a town called Santiago. Santiago is a very busy tourist town. It looks like it has a lot of cobblestone streets. It's very medieval looking, and a lot of cruise ships stop at the port nearby, and they bring busloads of people through because the cave of Altamira, where the prehistoric cave paintings are. They're very famous UNESCO heritage site, and so they will bring busloads of cathedral at Santiago, and also to see the caves. So I was standing in front of the cathedral. I just walked into town, and I was trying to figure out where I was going to eat. I was really hungry, and I knew the cafes, which close about by 3 o'clock, I knew the cafes were going to start closing. And a man comes up to me with a big camera and a southern drawl, and he says, "Are you a pilgrim?" And I said, "Yes, I'm a pilgrim." I was kind of taken aback, but it is pretty obvious who the pilgrims are. We have our packs, usually have a hat on our head, we look, so we look pretty obvious that who we are, or the pilgrims. And I said, "Yes, I am a pilgrim." And he said, "You are my first pilgrim." And I just thought that was quite humorous. He said, "Would you come over and visit my friends?" And he took me over to this cafe where they were sitting around talking, and he said, "Look, I met a pilgrim." Well, apparently what had happened was on the tour bus, their guide had told them about the Camino de Santiago and to watch for people that looked like me, and that they would be pilgrims that were walking to Santiago, and telling them a little bit about the history of that. And so that's why he had just heard about the Camino while he was on this tour. And when he saw me, it was like I was one of the exhibits in the town, I guess. But the next day was quite funny because in the middle of the day, a tour bus passed by me, and I went, "I wonder if the tour guide is currently saying, and if you look over to your right, you will see a pilgrim like I was just telling you about, walking along the side of the road." I don't know if that was the case, but I kind of, it was a little bit of a fantasy that went through my head after that. So next I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the choices that you have when you walk on the Camino. You can carry your stuff in your pack. This was my pack right here. Or you can choose to just carry a small day pack or a fanny pack with just your provisions for the day with you, and then have your heavier pack or your luggage carried around via a shuttle. And so you can choose to do that. You can choose to do it on a day-by-day basis. I always carried my things with me, except there was one stage that I had to go about 17 miles in one day, and it was going to be up over a very windy pass. And I knew it was going to be a long day. I was told it was pretty challenging. It wasn't as challenging as I was led to believe, which was nice. But I was really glad that I had, at that day, chosen to have my bag taken around, and it was waiting for me at the albergue. It made it a lot easier because it was a fairly challenging day. There's, as I showed you, there's many routes to take. Most people take this one that's in dark red, which is the Camino de Frances. I recommend, if you think you want to do the Camino Frances, that you not do it in the summertime. It is crowded with tourists. I did the Del Norte, which runs along the coast, and then I hit another trail called the Primitivo, which came in near Santiago. The Primitivo intersects with the Frances, and I went from having day after day of seeing hardly any people and it being very quiet. Some nights I was in albergues completely by myself, to as soon as I intersected the Frances, and this was in early November, it was crazy. There were so many pilgrims. The first albergue I came to had like 200 beds in it. So that's how crowded the Frances is. So I suggest that people, unless you like to be around a lot of people and a lot of crowds, I always recommend that you choose one of the other ones. There's also a route there's a couple routes down from other parts of southern Spain, and then the route from Portugal. So there's lots of ways to get to Santiago. You can do your research, which I'll talk about in a minute, and make the decision for yourself. I have thought that it would be kind of cool to do a winter Camino. I was thinking about doing the Frances in the wintertime, which I hear there's not hardly anybody on it. Although after this last week, when I heard that Spain was completely dumped on with snow, I may be reconsidering that. So I think it's important that you get in shape. I ran into pilgrims who just tried starting the pilgrimage with very little training, and they were not happy. They were having overuse injuries. Their joints were in bad shape. And sometimes these were young people. They had blisters, and they were just hobbling. And oftentimes you need a lot of time to recover from those kinds of injuries. And it may mean the end of your Camino, or if you try to push through with those injuries, you can hurt yourself permanently. So it's pretty important to, I think, get in shape first. There's lots of options for places to stay. You can do everything from camp every night, or you can stay in albergues, which is what most people do, or you can choose to stay in guest houses. A 3-star guest house, if there's 2 of you going together, a 3-star guest house, which is very nice and very comfortable. Oftentimes will feed you breakfast too. It's not going to cost you much more than 2 beds in an albergue. The nice thing, albergues are great for people traveling solo or independently. And the cost in albergues is usually somewhere around 10 euros. Sometimes they only ask 5 euros. And sometimes they'll just take a donation, so you can pay what you can afford to pay. So that's lots of options. And of course, there's also along the way, there's some very nice hotels. So you have a lot of options for places to stay. The other thing is the food. It's so wonderful, the food in Spain. It's worth going to do the Camino just for the food alone. It is really, really. Most days I had lots of options for food. This dish on the bottom was one of my favorites that I had in a town called Santoña. One day I stopped in this little cafe, and because I often stopped later than the normal lunch hour, usually around 2, to get my big meal of the day, I was the only one in the cafe, or there'd be only maybe a couple, so it was very nice. Most times you get the chance to order from what they call the menu. The menu is a primero, which is a first course, a second course, segundo, and a dessert. And you always get a drink. And always they offer you wine at the table, or you can have other drinks, soda or whatever, which is included in the meal. These meals, here is an example. example of the primero, which is this bean dish called babada. This was the segundo, or the main course, which was a plank steak and French fries. They just brought me a bottle of wine, of the house wine, to the table. It was wonderful. And then there was a postre. And believe me, after I ate all of this food, I still had room for the postre, which is the dessert. So this was one of my most on the Camino. So let me tell you one other thing about food. I'll go back. One other thing is that the cost of a meal, oftentimes cafes along the Camino will have pilgrim prices, and you will get a discount. So like a pilgrim's menu might be maybe 1, 2, or 3 euros cheaper than what it would be for other people. So I generally would get a nice meal like this would be about 10 euros, which if you think that's about $12, and that's an amazing amount of food, and it included the wine or my drink for $12. And there's no tipping in Spain, so that's what it's going to cost you. Your meal is your meal. So, and that is one thing that makes the Camino affordable for a lot of people. A few things about ways and reasons that people walk. Some people walk it like some extreme sport. I saw people like practically running the Camino, trying to get in 30, 40, 50 kilometers a day, almost nonstop. I don't know how they did that, but it wasn't for me. There are people that get up and leave the albergue when it's dark so they can make as many miles as possible and get to the next albergue, and then they quit around 1 or 2 o'clock. There are people that don't do much walking at all, but they kind of cheat a little bit and take buses or taxis to the next place. There's people that do it in big groups together, talking, etc., with their friends all the way. And then there's people that, of course, like me, that just are mostly do it alone. One reason I end up being alone so much is I'm a slow walker, and I would meet up, I'd be walking along with someone, and we would talk for maybe a few kilometers, but then it was apparent, especially we started going uphill, it became apparent that they could walk a lot faster, and I would just say, go on, I'm a very slow walker. So I usually had chances to meet and talk with people along the way, but I did spend a lot of time alone on the Camino, which had its value as well. I met one young couple who were stopping like at every settlement along the way and having coffee or wine or food all day long and laughing, and they just took all these little short hops. I don't know if they ever finished the Camino, but they were having a good time. There's places people that stay in posh places every night, and people that camp every night. There's people that I ran into one woman who said, I'll make no bones about it, I'm doing the Camino to lose weight. Good reason. Some people want to change in life. Some people are doing it for spiritual reasons. The young man that I met who came from Italy, he was walking because he was trying to decide whether to take a vocation in the church or to find a woman and get married and have children. So that was his only choices in life at that point. And he was using the Camino, walking all the way from Italy. And he had a mentor, a monk that was a mentor in Italy, who was helping him use the Camino for that purpose. There are people that research every single stage, exactly what they're going to do from day to day, and then there's people who just go along and they stop when they get ready to stop and have no plans except they just have a map and they just follow the map. So you can choose your way that works for you to do the Camino. My choice was I decided to make my Camino a Camino of gratitude. And what I did before I left was I took my journal and I wrote down a list of things in life that I am grateful for. Things like each of my children, the fact that I was able to homeschool my children, the fact that I grew up in a very secure home, the fact that I feel like I'm fairly resilient, the fact that I have a sense of humor. I felt like, just all these different things in my life. I always have food. I've always had food. I've never been hungry. So each day I would choose one of these things out of my journal and decide that day I would think about that and think about why I was grateful for that. And that's where my journaling came in. When I would stop and take a break, I would write a little bit about some of my thoughts around that kind of gratitude. And it made the Camino really, really special for me when I finished, because I felt like I had really thought a lot about how important gratitude is in our lives. And it really changed the way I think about looking at everything. Like, for example, right now we're in COVID. Some days when I start to feel like I'm getting a little depressed because I can't go anywhere and I'm limited as to what I can do, I go, shoot, look, I've got a warm bed, I've got food in my stomach. You know, it could be a lot worse, and I need to realize that what I've got right now is really special. So that was something that the Camino was very good about teaching me. So I'll tell you, let's see, I was going to tell you, this was a beautiful sculpture that was in a town called Cobresis, and it made me, when I came to that sculpture, I started walking around and around and around it. In the end, I sat there for about 45 minutes just studying that very simple sculpture, and I cried because I thought about all the meaning that that sculpture had for people left back home, going off on your own. There were so many meanings that it had, and it was probably the most profound piece of artwork I think I saw the whole Camino. So let's see, I was going to, oh, here's one night I had a room, and there's a long story about how I got to that room, but I had a room and it had a bath. I could take a bath and soak my poor bones. So some nights I splurged and had a really nice place to stay. And this was the nicest place that I stayed the whole time that I was walking. So let's see. So I'm going to give you a few things that I learned about doing the Camino. I already talked about. One is to get in shape, and I talked about that. Some people do the Camino like one segment, like maybe 2 weeks at a time, because that's all the time they could get off from work. I had some friends that they were doing it in short segments. They would walk about 10 days to 2 weeks, and then they would have to go home for whatever reason. They had some family commitments. And so as a result, they will only do the Camino that way. That's another way to do the Camino, and it's perfectly legitimate to do that way. But if you can do the entire Camino at one time, or your whole route at one time, whatever it is you choose to do, which usually if you go from, say, the border of France to Santiago or to the sea, it's going to take you somewhere, generally average is like 30 to 40 days, depending on how fast you go, and etc. But about 30, an average is 33 days, I think, from France to Santiago. But you do get after about 20 days, you do get into a special mind and soul state that is, you can't replicate any other way. You'll talk to people that do long distance hiking, that they will say the same thing. After a while, you get into this routine, and it can be really, really profound. So I really encourage, if you can do a whole time, one whole Camino at once, it can be very special. Another thing is, I think it's good to have a purpose, come up with a reason why you're doing the Camino. And that's where oftentimes a journal comes in, so that you can keep track of your emotions, because it can be very emotional. There will be times when you will just break down emotions that come up, and that's perfectly normal. It's probably not normal if you don't at some point have some emotional happening. Even if you do travel with other people, I suggest that you don't try to be connected at the hip the whole time. I think walking long stretches alone can be very, very special and very therapeutic. And again, it can lead to some profound thinking. And also, one thing that does means that you don't have to keep up with each other. Just say, well, we'll meet at this town, or we'll meet in a cafe at this town, or whatever, and then plan to meet later. Prepared that it will rain at some point. I was lucky; it didn't rain very much, but it is a good idea to be prepared with rain gear. I recommend going during a low season. I was there in the fall, so the weather was very nice and there were fewer crowds in the albergues. I never had a problem getting into an albergue at night. They weren't too crowded, and there was several nights that I was completely alone, or maybe only had one or two other pilgrims at that time. And also in the fall, the weather is cooler. Today I did this talk earlier this morning, and a friend of mine, Annie, who has done 6 Caminos, she says, don't go in the summer. It is too hot. So if you can avoid going in the summer, I recommend going some other season. Day, stop, rest, get some protein and calories into you. You may be amazed at how energizing it can be to stop and rest and get the protein, maybe some caffeine and sugar, which I did with my café con leches. That can be helpful as well. And you will enjoy the Camino a lot more if you take your time and not try to rush. You might be pleasantly surprised at what it costs you. I just recently figured out by looking at airfares and what the current costs on the Camino are. And I know that I figured out that you could easily do a full 50-day Camino. I took 50 days because I took several rest days where I didn't walk. So I was in Spain on the Camino for 50 days. And it would cost you less than $2,500, including airfare from the United States. If you live in Europe, the airfare is going to be a lot cheaper. So it's a fairly doable thing if you think about a month-long vacation or cost you less than $2,500. That's a pretty good deal. Let's see. And the locals will tell you, never spend more than €5 on a bottle of wine in Portugal or Spain, because that will get you a very fine bottle. And I found that to be true because I'm such a cheapskate and I'm always looking at wine that it doesn't cost very much. But in those countries, you can get really nice wine for not very much. I think it's important that you walk at a pace that's good for you. The guidebooks that you will have, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but the guidebooks are divided into so-called stages, but some of those stages can be maybe 30 kilometers, which is like 20 miles. That's a long way to walk in a day. I think I only had a couple of days that I walked even close to 20 miles. I think I had one day when I was just a little bit over 20 miles. That's a long day. And unless you're in really good shape and can do that kind of walking, you don't have to take each stage as the guidebook says. It's just a way that they can divide up the guidebook into chapters. You can be very flexible. There's albergues about every 5 to 10 kilometers along the way. So even if you get to a town and an albergue is closed, it's probably not going to be very much further before there's another albergue. And your guidebooks are going to tell you where those albergues are. Also be prepared to any given day to decide not to change your plans in the middle of the day. Interestingly enough, one day I had gotten to the albergue that I thought I was going to stay in, and it was like noon, and I had lots of energy, and I looked at my guidebook and I went, I think I'll go to the next albergue, which was about another I don't know, it was about another 8 or 10 kilometers. I think I'll just go to the next one because this is too soon to stop. So I just kept walking, and that night I was in a little albergue, and another couple showed up from Ireland, and they had gotten lost. I'm pretty sure they got lost. They got lost, or they decided to change their route. They weren't planning to be at that albergue that night. So the 3 of us were the only ones in the albergue, and we had dinner together in the little tiny kitchen, and we talked and talked and talked. Those people became very good friends of mine. Later, I ended up going to Ireland and staying with them twice. They ended up inviting me to come to a lamb festival that they have every year, and I was a guest presenter at the lamb festival there. All because we both ended up at an albergue that we had not planned to end up at. So expect those kind of serendipitous events to occur because you never know what's going to happen. I walked the additional 4 days from Santiago to the sea, which was a really cool experience. One thing is there's not as many people do that, and so you will run into fewer people, and it is the destination for the traditional Celtic pilgrimages, and for me that was very special. So I went all the way to the sea, and that was valuable for me. So if you have time, I would suggest going from Santiago all the way to the sea. I'm gonna go back over. Oh, here's where I ended up at the end of my my Camino was at Muxia on the coast. It's beautiful, a little village, and they allowed me to stay because it was the end of the Camino. They allowed me to stay at the albergue for 5 days, so I had a chance to kind of take time to think about my Camino and have a little bit of a retreat after my Camino to think about what it all meant to me. And here is where at the Atlantic near Muxia. So I want to talk to you a little about, if you have any questions, be sure to put them out on the comments, and I'll be glad to answer them. I recommend that you check out a website, and I will put this in when I load this up onto my Kathleen's Odyssey broadcast page. I will put these links there for you, but I recommend that you check up on this Camino de Santiago.me is a great resource. It's a forum. It's a little hard to get used to navigating around because there's so many topics, but I learned to use the search feature, and I did a lot of my Camino planning using the information there. People are very helpful. If you don't know something, you can ask a question on the forum and you'll get a lot of answers. It's also, while you're on the trail, it's a great way to find out if there's any issues on the trail, like if an albergue is closed or whatever, you can find that out if you keep in tabs with that. So let's see. Another way to learn about the Camino is you can read my blog post. If you go to Cathleen'sOdyssey.com and scroll down to where it says Spain and click on that, you will get most of my Camino posts, all of my Camino posts, or you can just type Cathleen'sOdyssey.com and Camino de Santiago. And I'll put this link there as well. Those are all posts about my Camino, one day at a time. And I also talk in there about, I share the piece, each day I shared what I was grateful for that day and some of the thoughts I had around that, that little piece of gratitude that I had. So as you can see, I'm doing this on Sunday night. This was kind of a last minute decision to make. I think in the future, I'm going to do my broadcasts on Sunday morning and Sunday evening, my time. And my next Facebook event, which will be next Sunday, I will be talking about Hamish, the traveling scarf. That was my companion while I was in Europe. And I would ask people, as I met knitters and spinners and crocheters in Europe, I would ask them to add to the scarf. And Hamish, when I left Europe after 13 months, he was 6 meters long, and he had over 200 contributors. So as you can imagine, there are tons and tons and tons of stories about Hamish. I won't be able to tell you all of them during that time. So let's see. I always want to ask you if you have topics that you want me to talk about, traveling topics, just let me know. I'm going to be choosing the topics until I have somebody ask me, would you to talk about so-and-so. And in fact, the reason I'm doing the Camino this week is because somebody asked me to do a presentation on the Camino. So if you have a preference of things for me to talk about, please let me know. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave you with a short video that I made while I was on the Camino. I was just starting to kind of learn about how to do videos. And it was the day I was walking to the town of Grotto. And there was a very famous Sunday market there, but I had to arrive by noon if I was going to be able to see it. But it was really worth the effort. It was a beautiful, beautiful Sunday market. And as I walked through with my pack, it was obvious to people that I was a pilgrim. And people were saying, oh, I did not mention, people were saying to me, Buen Camino. Buen Camino is the greeting that pilgrims give each other and people that see you on the trail will give to you. It means good journey or good way. Have a good trip, basically. It's a very traditional greeting. And so people saw me. It was obvious I was a pilgrim. I still had my pack. I was walking with my staff. And so, and then when I tried to purchase a few vegetables for my snacks, the vendors refused to take my money. And they just said, buen camino, or they would not take my money, which was very sweet. So farewell. Thanks for joining me. I hope to see you again. If you like the broadcast, be sure to like it on Facebook and share it with your friends and invite them to the next event. So here's the little video.